everybody. We're going to continue our discussion on neurotransmitters and their role in impacting tension flow, tension management. And so on the last call, we talked about adrenaline and noradrenaline, and we started to touch upon some of the others, but I thought we'd just kind of launch into it and pick up wherever we left off. We might as well do them in order, and I guess the next one would be dopamine. And so now this particular illustration that I found was just the simplest, easiest one. Most of what I have found online about neurotransmitters is infinitely more technical than what I was looking for this kind of a conversation. So it's molecular structure. I don't think anyone who's listening to this webcast really cares about all that. But what's important for them to know is that dopamine is labeled as a pleasure neurotransmitter. And that little paragraph below gives us a little bit to look into. So feelings of pleasure and also addiction, movement, and motivation. People repeat behaviors that lead to dopamine release. And so with that, I guess I'll toss it to Brian for just a second. And so Brian, we were talking last time around about how some people have got a much more impactful bowl of neurotransmitter soup that they are eating all day, every day. And so we meet people that have got a lot more adrenaline, a lot more noradrenaline than others might have that. So tell us a little bit about dopamine and how dopamine fits into that bowl of soup.
Well, dopamine is, we talked about neurotransmitters can be either excitatory, inhibitory, or modulatory. And dopamine is both excitatory and inhibitory. So it acts as a modulating the communication between the neurons. And by that, I mean, it has a kind of diffuse way of communicating, so it can totally impact an entire brain region. So, you know, when it releases the chemical, and it has a lot to do with the cycle, if you can think about it, of motivation, reward, and reinforcement. So it does a lot in terms of blood flow, digestion, your heart rate, kidney function. So it has this multifunctional kind of purpose. Mm-hmm. And they use this a lot. It's been studied now with Parkinson's, because it's heavily associated with the motor cortex. So I'm actually experimenting with this now in terms of exercise, where I'm using this new product called Halo Sport. Mm-hmm. And you put this headphone on and it creates this priming as you're actually moving. So you're essentially trying to mark the neuron for change. And so you want more of it. And that's what dopamine is. It doesn't take much to increase dopamine in the body, because anytime there's a strong anticipation of something, like say you have an intention and you have this deep curiosity for it, you can raise your levels of dopamine.
And so it's not so much triggered by an event like we were talking about for adrenaline triggering a fight or flight response, that this is instead just something that we can awaken whenever we want it to a certain degree. And so that's the excitatory part of it. But what about the reward part of it? So we did something and now we get this dopamine bonus. So what about that end of it?
Yeah, so it gives you the sense of alertness, focus, and a motivation. So it works well. Remember, there's no neurotransmitters that's a single actor, right? So dopamine tends to work well with serotonin. There's oftentimes epinephrine and norepinephrine involved in it. So that's where it becomes kind of this modulator effect of giving you just the right amount of energy and focus and alertness to do what it is that you need to do, so you can get some kind of benefit from it. Because again, like when we talk about stress, too much stress all at once can be deleterious to your health, but just the right amount of stress, then you can be productive with it, which is all an adrenal response typically is. Neurobiologically, it's designed to get you to move. So it's not so much that stress is bad. In fact, when in the laboratory, when we're studying this, we were looking at not what we typically call stress. Behavioral scientists and neuroscientists are looking at stressors. So in other words, they're looking at what triggered it. what's going on interoceptively internally and what's going on in the environment outside. So when I talked about this interoception that the nervous system is concerned with, it's concerned with all your set points. Like we have biological set points, right? So your temperature is a biological set point. When it goes below or above 98.6, you're going to feel some sensations. Same thing when it comes to our emotions, same thing when it comes to thoughts. So these things really affect the mood, and it affects physiological, it affects psychological, it affects the organs.
Very interesting. Okay, and I notice a couple of you guys have also unmuted. Anything you'd like to share about dopamine? Okay, now I noticed that Brian kind of made reference to serotonin, and I also see here endorphins. When I look at these simple identifiers for each one of them, it really is interesting. The dopamine seems to be about pleasure, serotonin is about mood, endorphins is about euphoria. And so it's interesting that these seem to be things that are interrelated, or one might lead to another. And so hopefully we can kind of flesh that out as today's discussion goes on. But I'm very curious to now go to the change grid and say, okay, so if I'm having this, an increased level of dopamine introduced into my chemistry, what happens to my movement on the change grid? So again, the change grid has a spot on it for every single possibility and the whole range of the way humans can be thinking and feeling and moving around. And so what impact does it have? Now, Brian, you've already said that it's excitatory. And so when we describe something as being excitatory, is that something that is impacting the vertical vector here, the level of stress someone's experiencing? Is it also impacting the amount of intensity they're experiencing about that level of productive tension? Is it also something that might be explained on the engagement layer, where we're talking about dopamine can also move us from awareness to intention and from intention to engagement? So if we think about dopamine as being an internal element in tension management, well, what exactly is changing in terms of movement on the change grid? Anyone have any thoughts about that? Feel free to unmute and chime in. Creating an intention, and from an intention to engaging, is it getting us more focused towards a particular outcome, or is the dopamine simply doing something else in terms of our levels of energy, which would move us on the change grid? So I'm curious to know, what is the effect of this dopamine in how we are finding ourselves on the change grid?
T, I don't know, can you hear me?
Absolutely, Diane, go right ahead.
Okay, so if we thought of, I'd like to see a lovely diagram of a normal curve. And if we thought of people being at the height of that normal curve, which is 68% of the population, as they move down in dopamine, they would have more apathy, they would have more being stuck, being lower in your change grid. As they move back to the normal curve, they would feel more of the power. As they move up into the higher end of the normal curve, the top 13%, or yes, right up there, or even 3%, they would feel too overwhelmed, because exactly what the gentleman before me said, it increases awareness. Well, if you want to be focused in power, you want to be aware of the task ahead of you. But if you suddenly become aware of noises, sounds, bills that you owe, something that the children are doing, a pain that you have in your left toe, then you are feeling overwhelmed and stressed and really immobilized.
And so then, put this in ChangeWorks terms, then you've just described dopamine as being kind of a function-based trend. That as the level of dopamine goes from zero, and I'm sure it's never zero, but it goes from being very, very low and starts to increase, we're going to move from being downgrid, from apathy up into even power apathy. We get to a sweet spot, so kind of like an ideal dosage, and we find ourselves in power. We're where we're more alert, aware, more focused, etc. And good things can happen if we were able to sustain things at that point. But if other things come along that end up triggering even greater levels of dopamine to be released, we're going to find ourselves moving further up grid, which also equals down on, if we looked at the normal bell curve you're talking about, we would talk about the relationship between tension and productivity. So tension on the vertical, productivity on the horizontal. So as the level of dopamine would increase, we could expect a corresponding increase in the person's potential for productivity. But as it gets to be too high, that productivity is going to fumble. Now that I've said that, that really, I'd have to modify the bell curve.
I have one.
Yeah.
I actually do have that. I'd be glad to send you, that shows boredom and apathy at the low end, productivity at the high peak, and then stress. I would call it decombobulation, but that's too technical a term, right? At the high end. I'd be very glad to give you my bell
I'd love to
curve
see that.
shows.
I'd love to see that, and I'll share it with everyone. All right, so we've been able to kind of establish then that not enough doesn't do much, the right amount is really sweet, and too much is not a good thing. And so I can feel that there is very much a connection between dopamine and what happens to someone's level of productive tension. Now the question becomes, does it, and if so, how does it impact the level of drive? So once I'm in that sweet spot, once I'm at the top of that bell curve, does dopamine actually support me in moving from that awareness into creating a more focused intention, and from that intention into a greater level of engagement, doing things that actually needs to be done? Or is that a different neurotransmitter that is introduced to our bowl of soup? Thoughts about that, Brian?
I would say that's if you get dopamine and acetylcholine working together, that's where you literally can, we call it marking a neuron for change. So in other words, the dopamine, remember, if you have any anticipation towards something, and it's it doesn't necessarily have to be in a heightened anticipation, but it could be like a deep curiosity, that will raise the level of dopamine. But what the acetylcholine will bring into the mix here is this idea of learning from whatever it is you're doing. So I like the way Diane explained things, but for me, it's going to be about, I'm thinking, if I can put it into terms, it's the experience of the experience that matter at that moment. Does that make sense?
Exactly. I would agree completely that there's an overlap, kind of like a Venn diagram overlap between your chemistry and your learned experience and expectation.
Exactly.
So tell us more about that, Diane.
Well, I'm a cognitive therapist. And so when a person gets excited and they think, okay, I'm going to engage in this task, I'm going to try this new thing that T. Napier has suggested, if in the past they have had failure, they have what I call an excrement response. Oh, I'm going to do this, and expectation will be high. And I once had a young man that I was helping do well on the SATs, and he got 100% on the pretest I gave him. And he said, "You're not going to tell my mother, are you?" Why? Because he was afraid he would not live up to her expectation. So I love that we're talking about dopamine, and I love that we are superimposing it on learned experience and what a person thinks is going to happen.
Excellent. Okay, and so let's talk about acetylcholine for a second. So here in just this little simple diagram, it says that acetylcholine is a learning neurotransmitter. It's involved in thought, learning, and memory, activates muscle action in the body. I'll be curious to hear about that part of it. Also associated with attention and awakening. And so just at the very surface, acetylcholine also sounds like it is excitatory. You guys can certainly correct me on that. But it's going to move me up grid. But just simple movement upgrade on the change grid does not in any way guarantee that learning is happening. I mean, we're always learning at a certain level, but deliberate, focused, intentional learning, engagement is not really happening. So it almost sounds like it's the acetylcholine that gets me, so the dopamine and the acetylcholine working together gets me into this ideal alert sort of area, into power on the change grid. But then it's like the acetylcholine that says, all right, let's learn, let's formulate an intention, let's get engaged, let's explore.
Exactly. I always say acetylcholine will give you the spark, right? So like they're studying Alzheimer's. They're using in the early stages of Alzheimer's, choline is an actual supplement that you can take. So they actually supplement with choline. So I always say it gives you that spark, this deliberate kind of alertness and focus. Because remember, when I talk about the way the nervous system operates, is looking for duration, path, and outcome. If duration and path or outcome are far, then you're going to need something extra. But if it's close, you don't need as much. So when you get this spark and you get this reward from the dopamine and you want more of it, you're marking the neuron for change. That's when plasticity actually happens, as I said, in recovery, so in sleep. But you mark it for change during some kind of intense focus, some kind of intense alertness.
Exactly. And then the organism learns that if they engage in a behavior and they learn something, it makes them feel good, then that becomes part of the more permanent change. So it's a combination of the chemistry, the experience, and the way the person labels it. If they label it as pleasurable, then of course they're going to be much more likely to engage in that behavior again. If they label it as, oh, excrement, I'm going to fail at some point and people will be disappointed in me, then they try to avoid it.
And so when I need to know a little bit more about where serotonin fits into this, because right now it seems like, all right, dopamine's getting me alert and ready to reward me, and acetylcholine is helping me get a little more focused on whatever it is that needs to be done. So all that feels like it's going on. How does serotonin then come along? I mean, is this about either I'm in the mood to do this or I'm not in this mood, or how is it impacting okay, I'll just say this, and this is a benefit for all the people that are listening. In our work as human development professionals, we tend to either try to get people who are too far upgrid in stress and dealing with all of the negative impacts that stress has on our life, get them to like come down, become a little bit more balanced, a little bit more functional, etc. Or we are trying to work with people who are very low energy and try to get them to move up so they have a little bit more energy to do whatever it is that needs to be done. But in addition to that, we also work to move people out grid, and that is to get them to formulate an intention, make some plans, have a goal, work on that goal, and move themselves further out grid through intention into engagement, into actually completing whatever it is they started. So we tend to either be moving people down and out, or we move them up and out. The other possibility is that we have people that are too far up, too far out, too far down, maybe even too far in, and we just want to bring them to a balance point where they can just find a little bit of peace and stability, a quiet moment. And so that's our work as human development professionals. And why I wanted to talk about neurotransmitters was because in our role as human development professionals, we're working with people's attitudes, beliefs, their behaviors, but ultimately those things that we have people think about, talk about, or do is triggering something biochemical that's going to either help it or is going to trigger it and might even lock it in as more of a long-term option they have. So this is what I'd kind of like to see. If we know that the neurotransmitters are really the method behind the magic, And we know what magic we're trying to create. I'm just very curious to know which one of these magicians' tricks, if you will, are actually helping that movement to occur. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, so they're working together. Many of them are working together, and the way they communicate and how they connect with the presynaptic or postsynaptic, the receptors in them. And then there's the idea of reuptake. So in other words, what isn't utilized is reuptake in the presynaptic. But when you talk about things like serotonin, this is another what we call neuromodulator. And so it has a significant impact in terms of the mood, anxiety, and happiness. 90% of it is said to be found in the gastrointestinal tract. So I think it was Peter on the last call that talked about the gut and that kind of thing. So many of these have a hormonal effect, right? So many of the what's called neuropeptides that are proteins in the cells. They're said to come from the pituitary and the gastrointestinal area. So they have this hormonal effect, and serotonin is one of those. So it's going to modulate, if you will, the mood. It has a lot to do with sleep. It affects your circadian rhythms. So it's a major inhibitory functions.
And I would agree and add to that. I see serotonin as the weather. Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? Is it partly sunny? Is it gloomy? And people who don't have the serotonin working for them tend to see things as cloudy most of the time. People who have an optimal amount of serotonin see it as sunny most of the time. The interesting thing, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the gentleman that is speaking first, but I love Brian. I love that biochemical and behavioral are connected. Of course, this is what we've been looking for. We've been going in separate worlds for 200 years, and now we're finally connecting. So that it's interesting when he mentions the reuptake. Some people have stronger breakdown of serotonin biologically, biochemically, genetically. And so these marvelous medication, the age of Prozac, the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, really have no drug in them at all. There is nothing in a Prozac or an SSRI that is going to make me any happier because my serotonin's fine. What it does, they got the Nobel Prize for chemistry for making the dendrites sticky. So the serotonin that you do have stays there a millisecond longer, and in time, it is sunnier instead of cloudy. So we are helping people enhance the utilization of their serotonin with these SSRIs. They are not taking drugs, and that's important for people to understand. They're not drug dependent, they're not happy pills.
Yeah, I love Diane.
I'm telling you. So one of the things that I learned from Diane very early on, one of the things I learned from Diane very early on was that, and Diane, you can explain this far better than I'll be able to recap, but that there was little sense in going through talk therapy with someone whose biochemistry was out of whack.
Exactly.
And until you could get the right neurotransmitters, the right hormones, the right whatever in balance, then you're really just talking about stuff that the mind is creating to somehow or another provide content or context to whatever this feeling they happen to have. And I thought that's just plain brilliant. And I remember, Diane, you actually said, and it's amazing how often once you get someone's chemistry in balance, their issues they wanted to talk about seem to just go away.
Exactly.
And I think that's for me, because that's what I have difficulty in explaining neuroscience, and I never tried to do it, but that's what tension management brought to the table for me, is a way of saying that, look, there's something going on internally, because I am certified in lifestyle medicine, and so I'm deeply curious about people's lifestyle factors, their behaviors, their diets, all these different kinds of things. But when we talk about some of these major neuromodulators like the dopamine, the serotonin, acetylcholine, histamine, norepinephrine, these are short-lived bursts, right? So you say, okay, if these are short-lived bursts, why is it that people are still sad? Why are people still angry and they remain, that for long periods of time? because they're rehearsing this narrative. So that all these other peripheral and associative factors come into play here. And it operates underneath the radar of awareness for most people. So they have no way of really dealing with it. So you go to the class, like the SSRs that Diane was talking about there, most of the time those are prescribed and are supposed to be utilized with behavioral contingencies so that you can actually start to change some of your behaviors. So now we're talking bringing in dopamine. So you're doing different things, creating different neuron structures for you to actually change your behavior. And oftentimes that doesn't work. So it becomes this dependence on just the pill alone. And then, you know, that's not just necessarily going to work for most people. It depends on how bad their behavioral change is needed.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I love Brian.
So I see, Jane, you've also unmuted. Would you like to throw something into the mix?
No, they're doing a great job of explaining things, and it's, yeah, really clear.
Okay, good. All right. So, so again, I encourage all of you guys that are listening in on this. If you've got something you'd like to share, something you'd like to ask, don't hesitate to do so.
So T, something about the dopamine that leads to a different kind of behavior. So let's say a person has low dopamine, and so they don't have that drive. Well, then they engage in something. It's usually what we call a self-injurious behavior, or behavior that has a high potential for being dangerous. Driving fast, spending money, unprotected loose sex, whatever. That raises the dopamine and makes them feel good. And then the person becomes habituated. They say, okay, gambling, going and putting, $1,000 out in a casino made me feel good. They then want to do that again. Whereas other people who have sufficient dopamine and maybe more intelligence and drive, we feel good when we accomplish something. We do a project, we set a goal. So there you are on your change grid. If you folks are excellent at coaching people to making changes in how they behave and then feeling good about it. The people that this doesn't work for is if the only way they feel good is if they do something outrageous, crazy, stupid, dangerous, then they get that high. But the successful people that you folks deal with feel that surge of dopamine when they change a plan at work or in their personal life, and they get a sense of competence and power, then that behavior becomes habituated.
This is really interesting because, as you've been describing this, what I'm realizing about the change grid, and again, I've only been working on this for 40 years, so it's fun to have a new aha. But the change grid is really all about external manifestations of what's going on biochemically. So I can't be in the out-grid area of the change grid, at least, I can't be there for any purpose unless my chemistry is supporting that.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to be up in stress unless something biochemical is causing that or supporting that or whatever. So the change grid is just a visual representation of all of the different ways people can behave as a result of whatever's going on internally. And so this discussion about neurotransmitters is the very first time we've tried to do any part of a merging of brilliance exercise looking at the internal environment. And so I'm finding this, interesting to the nth degree. Now, the question becomes, how do we use this when we're working with our clients, or do we even bother? Is this something we're just aware of? Obviously, depending on several of you on the call are MDs and PhDs, and so maybe you've got the ability to actually prescribe some of these medications, or I don't even know what to call it anymore. Diane, what do you call it? SSRI, if it's not a drug.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll mention something, and I don't know if this is within your scope or not, but yes, I'm enjoying this very much. I've recently become interested in something called pharmacogenetics. And this is more where in Brian's world, where people can take literally a saliva test, and it takes, 4 days to get results. And you get based on your genes and your enzymes, which medications are best for you. But what I'm finding interesting, back to the dopamine, there is apparently a gene called TAQ1A. I just learned about this recently. That is a down regulator of dopamine receptors. What? Some people genetically down-regulate, that means like turn off some of their dopamine receptors. Now I'm interested in the behavioral, and I'm telling you, I went through more than 2,000 articles, most of which are written in hieroglyphics that maybe Brian would understand, but I didn't. But what I did find is that people who have this are, quote, never happy. It's never enough. They strive and get whatever, and it's like that's all there is. They get the condo in Washington, D.C. It's not big enough. It's not elegant enough. The wife is not beautiful enough. The job is not whatever, enhancing enough. It turns out that this is a function of dopamine downregulation that happens to be genetic.
Yeah.
Well, I really wonder if that has would also be linked with addiction, because with
Yes.
addiction, the risky behaviors have to be escalating in risk to get that
Yes.
dopamine bump. And I wonder if that's at play in that cycle.
Absolutely. They are something like 10 times more likely to be involved in addictive substance behavior. You know, cocaine, what does cocaine do? It just gives you a massive release of dopamine.
Mm-hmm.
And so, are there medications or treatments for modulating the dopamine levels? I know
Well,
there is
now
for
I'm
serotonin.
saying that you should have the genetic test first before you start messing around with medication.
In fact, I'll share
Yeah.
with everyone that Diane and I had quite a long discussion about this genetic test last time she visited us. And basically, pretty much at the moment of birth, if you were to have one of these tests done, you would know, and it would serve you for the rest of your life, exactly what antihistamine might work best for you if you end up with a cold or whatever, or what kind of supplements would be best for you, or depending on whatever the malady happens to be, based on your genetic makeup, medication A might be far better than medication B. And while multiple ones might be useful, particularly in the case of SSRIs, there might be one that is ultimately the best one for you. And so can you imagine if we just said what everybody really should know and have this report when you go to the doctor is say, look, doctor, if you're going to prescribe something, this is my makeup. So Diane, I'll let you explain what I've missed there. But
Oh, that's exactly right. That some of them will tell you whether you should take Advil or leave. Why is it that some people do well on one and other people say that doesn't help me? And doctors or friends look at you and say, what do you mean you're taking Prozac and it didn't help you? Well, genetically, your enzymes aren't metabolizing it right. Or if your enzymes are too high, apparently you metabolize it too quickly and you're much more likely to get side effects. How come some people shake or get headaches when they take a medication, and other people say it isn't doing anything for me, and other people say, oh my God, you've changed my life. Now I'm capable of doing what I need to do on the change grid. So yes, this pharmacogenetics is relatively new, and I'd be glad to talk to anybody about it after this.
excellent, excellent. Yeah, because think about that, everyone. Up until now, and again, we have some physicians on the call, medicine has basically had as part of it that we've got multiple options available to us in the treatment of whatever. So let's give this a try, because in our experience, this seems to be useful for people in a significant percentage of cases. But, oh, well, that didn't work. Okay, well, let's try this one instead. Let's try this one instead. And each time you try one of these things, there may be no really bad side effects from it, but nevertheless, there is this now period of time where proper treatment didn't happen. And so if you could look at the results of this genetic profile and know, all right, this is what they have. Here's my 10, and it's interesting when you see the report. Here's the 10 or 12 medications that have all been used for this particular situation. And oh, look, the chart says this one has you in the red zone, so don't do that one. And this one is in the yellow zone, and so maybe not. But this one's in the green zone, so that's definitely going to work.
And
So,
back to your change grid, can you see how somebody who has finally tried a medication and it hasn't worked, it would push them down into apathy?
Or up to stress if the side effects are problematic. So you're right. It's going to move them off of that heart line of power into an unhappy range, upgrade or downgrade.
Exactly. Either they will feel apathetic, and why bother? Or they'll feel stress. Oh no, if I take this pill, last time I got the shakes and I had terrible headaches and a rash, so I'm really scared to do this.
And you know, and from the business perspective or the world of medicine perspective, every time someone takes a medication or follows a treatment plan that doesn't result, question marks arise about the abilities of the physician or the state of the art when it comes to whatever the world of pharmaceuticals, et cetera, happens to be. And so why do something that might result in people having unsatisfactory outcomes, delayed outcomes, frustration, loss of faith? If the truth is, for Diane, how much is this test if someone pays for it out of pocket? But you said a lot of the times you do it, the insurance is covering it.
Well, it's interesting. This is the business model. It started out at $5,700, but now Blue Cross covers it, Medicare covers it, and Army, TRICARE covers it. The cost, I understand, is $330. Oh, I recently just got certified, actually this week, and they're telling me my cost would be $250. And I'm not looking to make money, so I'm having it bill the patient. So for $250, you can find out which medications work for you.
And is that just, you said there's different batteries of this that are available. So you mentioned one that it's only
memory,
it's only
your memory is so impressive. This was a year ago we talked about it. Yes.
Yeah.
There's one that just does the psychological ones for anxiety and for depression. The one that I had my husband take does everything, and he came out, remember, warfarin sensitive, which means if he ever has surgery, don't take warfarin, you'll bleed. So yes.
Interesting. So if any of you are interested in learning more about that or having the test done, I'll definitely point you in Diane's direction. So yeah.
Start to take off now quite a bit because it's called predictive medical technology. And you see a lot of startups around this right now because they said it's not going to be uncommon any longer to find a centenarian. So the ideal is to start testing people earlier, and it's creating a new field. I don't know if Jane has heard of this, but it's creating a new field that's called precision medicine. So that's more personalized care. And as medicine shifts from the fee-for-service model to more value-based model, this is what excites me. So I joined a American Medical Association, have what's called Physicians Innovation Network. And that's something that we've been talking about quite a bit in terms of digital health solutions or med tech solutions, health tech solutions, a lot of predictive medical technologies. Because I take them for my gut, because I was a preemie baby, so I was just under 4 pounds at birth. And so I've been a lifelong vegetarian. So I have a lot of autoimmune issues where I can't eat certain things. So it's not like it, lactose intolerance. I lack the enzymes to actually digest things like meat, dairy products. So I grew up not eating ice cream. So I literally have to take these tests and I test different foods out for my own safety because I literally passed out at the beginning of January. I was walking and literally just passed out, have no memory as to why and what's happened. And then I was diagnosed with pernicious anemia. With pernicious anemia, your red blood cells are destroying themselves quicker than they're being generated. So then it started to impact, I had bleeding on the brain, so I had renal failure. So it started to impact a lot of things happening. So that's why I'm experimenting now with thermogenesis and food and taking those kinds of tests for the gut to see what food sensitivities do I have, because a lot of vegetarians and vegans, they lack vitamin B12. You don't get that from plants, you get that from meats. So I have to give myself injections. So there's all these different kinds of things that, had I known this, you know, I could have avoided being in the hospital for 4 days in intensive care. I received a nice bill for $53,000.
Brian, my hat's off to you that you have overcome these major adversities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And see the medicine's way of treating it, and I had to tell the doctors that I am a physician. You see a rheumatologist, because there's over 140 different categories or conditions that are categorized as autoimmune. So everything from rheumatoid arthritis, all these different kinds of things. So their way of treating this pernicious anemia, he said, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to give you methotrexate. I said, no, you're not. Methotrexate is a chemo drug. So their way of treating it is to kill off the bad cells. The challenge with that is, as it is with any chemo drug, it doesn't just kill off bad cells. It also kills off good cells in the hope that it will regenerate themselves. That's why chemo has such a powerful impact on a person's body. I said, I'm not doing that, because there's 3 triggers with all autoimmune conditions: gene or gene expression, diet, and lifestyle. Those are all 3 things that I can control.
What I think is fascinating about what Brian is saying, aside from the medical part, getting back to your grid, is that he obviously operates in a position of power. And he's obviously learned that taking in more information, he uses the IQ to keep him in that position of power and avoid the stress and avoid the apathy. So I think, Brian, you are a living example of T's grid.
All right, thank you.
So Diane, I did have one more question about this test, and several people you're seeing in the chat probably are interested in it. Is there any reason why it can't be administered to a newborn or to a child, so that parents don't have to, you know, experiment with their offspring if it comes down with?
I think it's an excellent idea. I'm not aware of it, but I know that they do. All babies on day 1 get a blood test to see about phenylketonuria. Are they metabolizing proteins properly, or do they have Down syndrome? And that, you know, this is the whole thing with equal and phenylalanine. Phenylalanine is a protein. Isn't that right, Brian?
Yes.
It's a protein, and it's only people who cannot metabolize that protein that it acts as a neurotoxin. The rest of us, I make sure I have 2 servings of protein a day. Oh, I need to tell you this because it's so interesting. The study done in Harvard, a dietitian asking whatever number of freshmen coming in, everything that they ate, including these, quote, fake sugars. It turns out the dependent variable was, are you in love? And it turns out that more of the females using Equal, which is this phenylalanine, feel that they are in love, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual, than the women who avoid it like the plague. Isn't that interesting?
So artificial sweeteners increase our love,
If they have phenylalanine, which is a natural protein that is found in high concentrations in breast milk and cow's milk.
Yeah.
So it's back to your neurotransmitters. This protein phenylalanine apparently helps you feel that you're in love.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we were talking
like
about the
neuropeptide. Yeah, exactly.
Say that again, Brian.
It acts like a neuropeptide. So again, those are the proteins found in the molecules. Opiate is another neuropeptide. So, you know, yeah. So these things can be very addictive, and they can, again, these things can modulate an entire region of a brain.
And see, this is why I think it's so interesting to, as we talk about neurotransmitters, et cetera, that we also include food, because
Mhm.
food is one of the most powerful drugs we introduce into our bodies every single day. And if those, if certain foods that we're eating are in turn adding certain things to our chemistry that are causing problems or helping us, I think that's really something that has to be looked at as well. So now, whether those foods are triggering these neurotransmitters and neurochemicals, or whether the food substance itself is having some sort of an impact, that'll be interesting to explore. I know personally that as of today, I have not had any added sugar in my diet whatsoever in 2 months. Now, if you ask me, do
Wow.
I feel any better? I would say to you, I really don't notice. But for all I know, these things that were bothering me disappeared ever so slightly. But I know that I have no sugar. I don't need naps in the afternoon anymore. Um,
Ooh.
I know that I used to be a snuffleupagus all the time. I was always had this nasal congestion or whatever going on. I don't
Mhm.
seem to have that anymore.
Hmm.
And I noticed in recordings from a while back, I was constantly clearing my throat, just quick little clears. And I'm still doing it a little bit, but nowhere near as much as I was before. So is that all because of added sugar being eliminated? That's what I don't know. But it would be interesting to kind of explore how
I don't,
those.
but bringing it back to your grid, you see, you operate in power. So you say, the more information I have, the better I can help myself function health-wise, mentally. People who are down in apathy, they may read the same articles that you do, but they say, why bother? People who
Mhm.
are up in stress say, oh my God, I'm afraid to try that. Oh, who knows what will happen? The last time I tried this, I got very whatever. So your grid explains the behavior of reacting to the chemistry.
Mm, excellent. I'm so finally, after 40 years, I know what it actually does. It was a big, honestly, it was a big aha for me. I mean, I've never really thought that what the change grid actually is a diagram that is representing what's going on internally. I mean, now that I'm saying it, it feels absolutely obvious because anything we're doing externally has to come from whatever's going on internally. But I've never really looked at the internal processes and mechanisms. And
You know what's fascinating about the synergy that you're doing today that I'm enjoying so much? It is not that your view is right and my view is wrong, or my view is right and your view is wrong. It's that all of our views are right, and that a human being is a multi-dimensional entity. And so all of this, your psychology, your physiology, and your social piece, and I'll give you that Venn diagram that I have, thank you, all interact to present who you are.
Mhm.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Well, this is wonderful. And so we're at the top of our hour, so we'll be bringing this to closure pretty soon. One thing I would like to just add into the mix in preparation for our continuation next Tuesday, and I do hope you can all participate, and I do hope you'll invite others to join in as well, is I want to know where endorphins fit into this whole mix. Because if dopamine is my reward from some sort of an addictive or habitual sort of a process, then what takes it up to the level of euphoria, or is that something totally different? So I can't wait to see how that all fits in. So many of you have unmuted. Any final comments before we end for this session?
Just a
This is
fascinating
Kathy.
discussion.
It's fascinating, and it's fantastic because I struggle like Brian does. We've talked about this with so many autoimmune kinds of issues and things my entire life, and have come to, that have come to the fore, you know, later in life as well. And I've always kind of intuitively known that these things were going on, but I didn't know how to address them. And I think the connection between this and the change grid is a flash of brilliance, and it makes absolutely perfect sense. So what a wonderful breakthrough, and I'm just delighted to be able to listen and take in what these bright minds have to say. So
Oh,
thank you.
thank you, Kathy. That's great. And Jim, you started to contribute?
I was just saying the same thing. It's just fascinating to hear all of this and to think about it and appreciate being part.
Well, and you know, Jim, as we were talking about this, I was thinking about you and your specific kind of practice. So just very briefly, tell people what the population is that you work with is, and tell me if any of this really resonates with that kind of work.
Yeah, I'm a chaplain in a psychiatric center. So especially the last part of trying to find right medications. I'm not involved in making those decisions, but just, thinking about it as people have the information that can pinpoint what's going to help them best and then move more into power. But I also see the people that move into apathy. I was talking to someone today and it was just like, the information is overwhelming, don't want to deal with it. How it all fits together.
Yeah, because doesn't now that make you wonder, is that the essential, the essence of who they are? Or is it the way they're currently receiving treatment is somehow or another, not the right medication for them or whatever, and that's the side effect? So I think this is intriguing. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jim's population that he works with is not entirely there of their own free will. So, right, a lot of these people are court ordered?
Well, yeah, court ordered, doctor ordered, they're persuaded.
Right, persuaded, I like that. So they're not necessarily excited to be there. And he's got that has to be factored into as well. The patient has to be willing.
Yes.
If they're going to get real benefit from it. So there you go. All right. Well, again, we're at the top of the hour, so I'll get this all done and put up on YouTube for you guys to see. Those of you who have contributed to the dialogue, I'll make sure that we give some credit. Your credit is due there. And so with that, we'll pick up where we left off on the next call. So thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Everybody.